Before the story begins, let me ask you something. Have you ever had a moment in your life that seemed small, ordinary, almost forgettable, but long after it passed, it stayed with you? A moment that shouldn't have mattered, but somehow changed the way you felt about yourself, about connection, about being seen. Because this story begins like that. Quiet, unremarkable, harmless. And that's exactly why it stayed with me. But before we begin, if you enjoy deep, emotional, real human stories, stories that don't rush, stories that breathe, subscribe to this channel now. Not because it helps the algorithm, but because stories like this deserve to be heard all the way through. Now, let me take you back to the evening everything quietly shifted. I wasn't expecting anything unusual that night. Nothing dramatic. Nothing meaningful. It was just one of those evenings that slip by unnoticed. I had been outside earlier, trimming the rose bushes along the front fence, my hands still faintly scented with soil and petals when I stepped back inside. The house was warm in that comfortable way homes get toward sunset. Not hot, not cold, just settled. The kind of quiet you don't think about until something interrupts it. I had barely set my gardening gloves down when my phone buzzed. It was Marlene. She lived 2 houses down, close enough that we waved to each other regularly, close enough that favors didn't feel like favors. Her message was rushed. She had been called into an emergency shift at the clinic. Something unexpected. Something she couldn't say no to. And then the question came. Could I watch Jacob for a few hours? I didn't hesitate. Of course I said yes. Jacob was 14. Polite. Reserved. Serious in a way that felt older than his age. The kind of boy who listened more than he spoke. He reminded me, painfully, of my own son at that age. The way he used to sit at the table with his shoulders slightly tense, trying to look grown, trying to be taken seriously. So I said yes without thinking twice. I made a quick pot of tea, chamomile and malt, the kind that settles the nerves, and changed into something more comfortable. A soft beige sweater. Loose navy slacks. Nothing fancy. Just home. I set the dining table with Jacob's school books, stacking them neatly, lining up a pencil and notebook like it mattered. The house felt still. Peaceful. Sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, painting the wooden floor in slow-moving patterns of gold and amber. For a moment, I just stood there and breathed. Jacob arrived right on time. Backpack slung over one shoulder. Slightly out of breath. A little awkward, like he wasn't sure where to stand. He thanked me immediately, not rushed, not automatic, but like he truly meant it. I offered him a glass of orange juice and a few oatmeal cookies I'd baked the night before. He smiled. Shy. Genuine. We sat down at the table and opened his notebook. Civics. Community involvement. Local government. The kind of assignment that sounds dull until you start talking about it. As I leaned closer to read over his notes, something familiar stirred in me. The old instinct from years ago, when teaching came naturally, when explaining things felt like purpose instead of obligation. And then I noticed it. The way Jacob glanced at me. Not constantly, not boldly. Just quick looks. Then his eyes dropped back to the page. At first I dismissed it. He was a teenage boy. Awkwardness came with the territory. But there was something else. The way he sat straighter than necessary. The way he listened, truly listened, like he was afraid to miss something important. It reminded me of my son when he wanted to impress someone he respected. I smiled quietly to myself and kept teaching. Jacob had beautiful handwriting. Careful, deliberate. He listened intently, nodding, asking thoughtful questions, scribbling notes in the margins. We talked about communities, about how small actions ripple outward in ways we don't always see. I told him about volunteering at the food pantry during the holidays, about how sometimes listening to someone mattered more than fixing their problem. He absorbed every word. I could see it in his eyes, not excitement but something deeper. Thoughtfulness. After about an hour, his pencil stopped moving. He stared at the page like the answer had disappeared. I asked if he was okay. He hesitated, then nodded. He told me he'd been thinking about what I said, about kindness, about how even little things mattered. I encouraged him to keep talking. And when he looked up at me, something shifted. His eyes met mine, young, honest, searching, with an intensity that caught me completely off guard. "You talk to me like I'm not just a kid," he said quietly. "Like what I say actually matters." My chest tightened. I hadn't meant to do anything special, but clearly it had been. I told him he was thoughtful, that he noticed things others missed. I rested my hand gently over his for just a moment. Not planned, not intentional, just instinct. He didn't pull away. His cheeks flushed, and he looked down. The room felt suddenly very still. The clock on the wall seemed louder than before. I pulled my hand back and reached for my tea, trying to bring the moment back into neutral territory. "We finished the assignment." He packed his papers slowly, slower than necessary. At the door, backpack over one shoulder, he paused. "Can I ask you something?" he said. I said yes. He asked if I ever felt like I was the only one who really listened to people. The question stunned me. I answered honestly. Sometimes. And then he hugged me. A simple hug. Gentle. Brief. But full. Then he was gone. That night, long after the house had gone quiet again, I couldn't stop thinking about that moment. About the way he looked at me, not like a boy, not like anything inappropriate, but like someone who had felt understood. And the next morning, that feeling followed me. There's a point when you realize a moment has weight. Not because it's loud. Not because it's dramatic. But because it asks something of you. Responsibility. Restraint. Truth. By the time the fourth afternoon arrived, I could feel it in my chest before I ever heard the knock at the door. That familiar, gentle sound. Not urgent. Not demanding. Just present. I stood there for a second longer than usual before opening it, steadying myself, reminding myself that what mattered most was not how something felt, but how it was handled. Jacob stood on the other side, backpack slung low, shoulders slightly tense. He smiled when he saw me, but it didn't fully reach his eyes this time. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. The house felt different that day. Not warmer. Not colder. More aware. He didn't head straight to the dining table like before. Instead, he paused in the living room, glancing around as if he were seeing the space not as a refuge, but as something fragile. "Do you want tea?" I asked. He hesitated. "Maybe later." That was new. We sat at the table anyway, but the books stayed closed between us. The quiet stretched, not awkward, but heavy, like something waiting to be named. Jacob finally broke it. "Can I ask you something kind of big?" "You can ask me anything," I said gently. "That doesn't always mean I'll have the perfect answer, but I'll be honest." He nodded, fingers tracing the edge of his notebook. "Do you ever stop doing something," he said slowly, "even when it's good, because you're afraid it might stop being good if it goes too far?" The question landed exactly where it was meant to. I didn't rush to answer. Because this moment mattered. "Yes," I said finally. "I have. More than once." He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "I think," he swallowed. "I think this place matters to me. Talking here. Being listened to. I don't really get that anywhere else." There it was. Not attachment. Not confusion. But need. And needs deserve care, not indulgence. "I'm really glad you told me that," I said. "And I want you to hear something very clearly." He looked up. "What we've shared here, the conversations, the listening, that's real. And it's important. But it's important because it's safe. Because it's grounded. Because it helps you grow, not depend." His brow furrowed slightly, not in disagreement, just in thought. "I don't want to mess it up," he said quietly. "Neither do I," I replied. "That's why we protect it." Over the next week, things changed, but they didn't disappear. And that difference mattered. The front door stayed open when he visited. Homework stayed at the table by the window. Conversations stayed thoughtful, purposeful, warmth without confusion, care without crossing lines. And something unexpected happened. Jacob didn't grow quieter. He grew steadier. One afternoon, while we were working through an essay outline, he paused mid-sentence and said, "I helped a kid in my class today." "Oh," I asked. "He's kind of invisible," Jacob said. "No one really talks to him." I asked if he wanted help with math. I smiled. "How did that go?" "He looked surprised," Jacob said. "But good, I think." Then almost shyly, "I think I learned how to do that here." That was the moment I knew. This wasn't about me. It never had been. It was about what listening can unlock in someone who's never felt heard. The ending didn't arrive like a scene from a movie. It came quietly. On an ordinary afternoon. Marlene came by herself that day, stopping at the door with a tired smile. "I just wanted to thank you again," she said. "Jacob talks about you all the time. About how you helped him think. About how you made him feel capable." My throat tightened. When Jacob came to say goodbye, he stood a little taller than before. Not older, just more sure. "Thank you," he said. "For everything." "You don't have to thank me," I replied. "Just keep being who you are." He nodded, then added, "I will." And then he left. No hug this time. No lingering pause. Just a quiet understanding. That evening, the house returned to its old stillness. But it didn't feel empty. It felt complete. Weeks passed. Life moved forward. But I noticed changes in myself too. I listened more. I volunteered again. I spoke with intention. Because sometimes the most meaningful connections aren't meant to last forever. They're meant to remind us who we are when we show up with care. And sometimes, time has a quiet way of settling things. Months passed after that last afternoon. The seasons shifted without asking permission. Leaves falling where flowers once bloomed. The house adjusting to silence the way it always had. But something inside me had changed, and that change didn't fade with time. It rooted itself gently, like something planted with care. I heard about Jacob occasionally. Marlene would mention his grades improving. A teacher who noticed his confidence. A debate club he joined, surprising everyone, including himself. Once, she told me he'd started tutoring younger students. "He says listening matters," she said, smiling. "I wonder where he got that from." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Some connections aren't meant to continue. They're meant to transform. I learned that being needed isn't about being central in someone's life. Sometimes it's about standing at the edge of a moment and helping someone step forward on their own. Years later, on a quiet afternoon much like the first, I found myself trimming the roses again. The same sunlight. The same stillness. Only now it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. I realized then that the most meaningful moments don't announce themselves as milestones. They pass quietly, disguised as ordinary kindness, simple conversation, shared understanding. And when they end, they don't leave absence behind. They leave strength. Jacob didn't need me anymore. And that was exactly the point. I closed the door that evening with a calm heart, grateful not for what remained, but for what had been given, learned, and released at the right time. Because sometimes, the greatest act of care is knowing when to let a moment end, exactly as it should.